Hello and welcome to Valiant Growth. Today I'm talking with Jane Bernard. She's the author of Am I Really Hungry and an expert on intuition. Hello, Jane.
Good morning, Philip.
Jane, could you tell me more about intuition?
Of course, intuition is our sixth sense. Everybody has it, men, women, and children. It's just like seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, and smelling. It protects us and it gives us pleasure. But the way intuition works is like our hand. We have five fingers, so we have five senses. Our sixth sense is like our palm. If you hurt your palm, you can't use your fingers well. You can't pick something up. But when your palm works well, all your fingers work together. Plus, your palm connects what you sense with what you know in your head, which is important, and what you feel in your heart. And it balances everything. So intuition is a clarifying and balancing tool that we all have. It's like our inner GPS.
Right. And the reason why I contacted you is to find out more about intuition as applied to eating. And I think there is value in learning about the science behind it,
Uh-huh.
even in building habits around it. But I think the higher goal, and at the end of the day, you want to create a more connected experience, and that's more sustainable. So could you tell me more about intuitive eating?
Absolutely. Well, eating is really like a metaphor for life. When we eat, there's only two times in our lives that we really use our senses consciously. One is during sex, and the other one is with eating, but we tend to ignore our senses when we eat. Intuitive eating is a way of connecting what we really need with who we are. And the way it works is by really noticing with your senses how you feel. And then when you look at your food, seeing what it looks like to you, what it smells like, how it tastes, and really respecting your own thoughts. Intuitive eating is eating to satisfy your hunger, but it's not just your hunger for a meal in terms of the classic thinking. What it is, it's your total hunger. So that's why we have conversation when we eat, because that satisfies social hunger. And when we eat slowly, intuitive eating is also eating slowly and savoring your food, because the point of eating, besides to satisfy hunger, is to give us pleasure.
Sorry, go on.
What were you going to say?
Oh, I wanted to ask you how you discovered this idea. Did it come to you naturally, or is it something that you picked up on like later?
Well, that's a really good question. I discovered the idea because I was going through a hard time in my life and I couldn't connect with any passion. And like to me, if you don't have passion, you have nothing. And so part of my background is that I've worked with severely autistic kids and even brain damaged people. And I learned that the most basic way that we connect with each other is through our senses. So I started using my senses to just tune into myself, because when you don't have touch with your passion, you're not in touch with your own heart and soul. And so with by tuning into my senses, what I did was I started writing for an hour a day, just what I could see, hear, taste, touch, and smell. And then, of course, I realized that it evolves into eating. And I started talking about it, and I was actually asked to write the book on intuitive eating. That's how I got into writing about it. And I worked with dieters for a couple of years. And what happened is I learned is that when people use their intuitive tools with their senses, not only does it empower them to eat in a way where they like their bodies and they feel healthy, but it changes their whole lives. Because When you eat with dignity, you reinforce dignity in every other aspect of your life. And you were talking before about connections. Well, our senses are our connections. They're our only connections we have with our world around us. If we weren't seeing each other, we wouldn't know we were there. You know, if we couldn't hear, we wouldn't know that either. So we really take our senses for granted. And if you just spend, one of the things I had my people do that helped them connect with their senses is just for like 1 minute a day, look around you and say out loud what you're grateful for. It can be, you can be grateful for the fact that you woke up. You can be grateful for the fact that you have a good cup of coffee. It's not about anything that isn't obvious. Intuition is totally obvious, and we just ignore it because we're socially conditioned to ignore it.
Yeah, tell me more about that, because I wanted to ask you how do we lose our connection with our intuition? But you already said socially conditioned, so tell me
Right.
more about
Well, we lose our connection with our intuition, unfortunately, mostly as children, because in our Western societies, when a child comes up to their adult and says, I don't really, this doesn't feel right to me, and the adult wants them to do that, they have to do it anyway. Or if they're in school and they think something stupid that they're learning or the way it's being done is wrong, instead of being asked why and really understanding where the child is coming from, children are put down and demeaned. So people stop trusting their intuition. Ironically, curiosity, which is something we tend to associate with children, curiosity is actually having an open mind. And having an open mind is the best way to make connections. So one of the things that sensing does is, like, the more you use your eyes, the more your natural curiosity kicks in. The closer you listen, the more it kicks in. Like, for example, like if say you're on a date and you really are having trouble relating to the person you're with, or you're having an argument about something, if you stop everything and just take a breath, two things happen. One thing is it gives you the opportunity to connect with yourself, because breathing, like eating, is often a metaphor for how we live our lives. If you breathe really fast or really shallow, you're not really inhaling your life. And just like if you eat really quickly, you're not tasting your food. So, but back to communication. If you So you take a breath and you use that brief moment to really look at the person you're talking to. And what you will see is, if you look into a person's eyes, is you'll realize that you know much more than you're responding to when you're responding off the cuff. Another reason that people deny their intuition is because there's such a focus in our society on emotional thinking. What are you feeling is usually like happy, sad, those kinds of things. But the trouble with emotional thinking is that it's usually based on something that happened in the past. So everything changes. The thing that's great about intuition, and of course all of our senses, is that it's only can exist in the present. Just like passion can only exist in the present, or fire, when fire burns, it can only exist in the present. So when you take an intuitive pause and you tune in with your senses, you're connecting with the present. And you may realize that when the person you're looking at actually is saying to you that they're hurt, and or not that they're angry, but you're responding to something out of anger that was said in the past. And you realize also that when you listen, you can hear tone in people's voices. And the thing that's very cool about intuitive eating is, if you practice focusing with what I call intuitive tools when you're eating, it becomes 100% automatic in every other choice you're making. So that, sure, when you're eating, it's a good way to train yourself to think intuitively. Like, some intuitive tools are things like curiosity, like how does it taste? How does it smell? Is it good for me? Does it look greasy? What do I really want? Or another intuitive tool is dignity. Dignity is something you feel. All intuitive tools like curiosity, you can feel it, but you can't think it. Dignity, you can feel it, but you can't think it. Patience, same thing. You can feel it. Even courage. All of these things we feel. So when you learn to use intuitive tools when you're eating, what happens is when you're in a social situation or at a business meeting, you automatically check in with dignity before you respond, or you automatically take a pause and look at a person to see what they're really saying. And it enhances your ability to focus, and it enhances your ability in terms of timing, and it enhances your connections.
Do you have any other techniques for being present in the moment? Because I know personally, and I'm sure that other people share this too,
Mm-hmm.
how hard it can be to really be in the moment and to really shut down the chatter a little bit, the mental chatter a little bit, and just to be there. I know, I'm sure that a lot of people find this challenging. So how can you do that?
Well, that's a great question. Um, One way that's just wonderful that we all shut down the voice is with music. If you have music that you like, listen to it. Because when you really enjoy it, if you really enjoying and listening to music, even if you're singing along, you're giving your brain a chance to relax. Our brains are just our hard drive, which means they're full of viruses and spam. And that's what the internal chatter is, right? And the present is the only thing that we need to respond to. And we're responding physically to the present all the time. So music is one way to learn to be in the present. Give yourself 5 minutes of music, or as much as you want to do. It's different than television because TV is uses more senses, but music tends to relax your mind. Another thing to do is if you work out, that's a very good way to focus and to clear your head. Okay, what happens is when you're working out, you actually achieve inner outer fitness if you focus on your on intuitive skills while you're working out. Um, it's the kind of thing where you know your body better when you tune into what you're sensing. And working out, you need to push yourself to the edge. That's the whole thing that people do when they work out. You can't find the edge if you're not connecting with yourself physically, mentally, and spiritually. You're like, if you're missing one of those things, you've got the chatter going. So I would say that music is one way to help clear your head. I would say working out is a way to clear your head. But what I was saying when you lost me is everything worth having in life takes effort. And if you want to make $1 million, you can dream it, you can want it, but if you don't do the legwork, it's not going to happen. And the same thing is with your intuition, especially because as adults, we're so we have to break through old bad habits. And the best way to do that is very simply by choosing to notice what you notice. And when you really do that, you kick the voice out of your head because it's too much. You only process certain amounts. Also, there's two things. There's a difference between your intuitive voice and that annoying chatter that you were talking about. Your intuitive voice will never guide you to do anything that's not in your best interest because intuition is part of your survival instinct. So if you hear a little voice telling you to have a cigarette or that you're bad, it's not your intuition. Intuition is just a physical sense, and the whole point of it is to guide you to realize your highest potential. So if you hear the other voice, it's not your intuition. It's social conditioning.
Right. That's as I was reading your book, and this is in the, I think, in the first chapter, perhaps, or definitely in the very first part. Uh, it's interesting how what you talk about with the inner voice. It's in every psychological system you have different names for this concept. So one system that I'm familiar with and that I like, it's called internal family systems. And well, the idea is it splits these voices into certain roles, and you'd have you'd have the true self, which would go for your best interest, and then you'd have internalized voices of parents, of people in your groups who would misguide you. And I think the idea is similar on this one. But yeah, getting back to, do you music? I can, at this point I can listen for around 30 seconds before I lose it. I lose my focus. Is this something that you get better at with practice? Is this something worth implementing as a habit?
Well, well, there's other things besides music. If you're losing your focus after 30 seconds, the thing about intuition is you should never, it's not something that you force yourself into. So what you need to do is figure out where your focus is going. What are you aiming at? If it's something that you need to do that you're being nudged about, do it. If it's something you've already done and you're worried about it, then you have to, part of intuitive thinking is learning to respect yourself. It's honoring your efforts. That's another thing that people are not taught to do, that they're basically conditioned against doing. But the fact is, if you can't, the most important person for you to depend on is you. So you shouldn't judge yourself, but you should be honest with yourself. That's part of intuitive thinking. So if the music doesn't work for you after 30 seconds, don't do it. Do you do any kind of exercise?
Not really. I walk. I wouldn't call that exercise, but I like walking.
I love walking myself. And so, like, when you're walking, what you can do just to discipline yourself, because your mind is a muscle and it needs discipline like everything else, but it doesn't need the kind of discipline that we're taught. What it needs is the kind of discipline to trust your intuition. And so, like, when you're walking, if you set your phone on a 5 minute timer, like if you know you're going to be walking for 5 minutes, and you use that time to really see what's in front of you. And it could be anything from a lady wearing a weird dress to a dog. It doesn't matter what you look at. But if you start training yourself to actually see, what will happen, and it's just like magic, what will happen is when you're in a business situation or a social situation, you will automatically start using your eyes more. And the more you focus, it doesn't mean you will completely eliminate inner chatter, but everything will start to change. It's gradual. It's a process. The intuitive tools, there are part of this is a language thing. Like, we use a different language today than we did 20 years ago. So, like, the first one, I call self-defense, but really that's, in the old days they called that foresight. And like, we use foresight when we cross the street. You look both ways before you cross, right?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Uh, Foresight is just self-defense. That's intuitive. That's your senses working together. Because when you look both ways, you're listening, you're using your eyes, and you're connecting with your brain. So you're really integrated and really focused. So using foresight is a way of clearing your head, because it's focused on the real needs. The next one is patience. Patience is the one that everybody hates. I just, when I bring up the word, people turn green. However, patience is just a form of breathing room. It's just self-respect on a certain level. When you're patient with yourself, for example, like you after 30 seconds, you can't listen to the music. So don't respect that that doesn't work for you. But like if you really want to experience what I'm talking about, give yourself patience and then try to do something where you really use your eyes, because we all have different our senses are called modalities in the education world. So like you may be a person who really receives information more comfortably through the visual than through your ears, which may be why the chatter comes through with the music.
Right.
So give yourself a chance, give yourself some breathing room. And also curiosity, as I mentioned before, is intuitive thinking. And curiosity is using what you sense. It's not mental. It really isn't. The most creative people are spontaneous. But even spontaneity is built on something. Everything comes from something. Everything like fire, I mentioned fire before. Fire can only exist when it's burning, so it's attached to something. You can connect with your intuition when you trust your inner truth, because that's what will power it forward. Another intuitive tool is, we call it comparison shopping today, or options, but in the old days they called it prudence. And in fact, we always have a choice. You always have the power to make a choice in any situation. As I said, you have the power to not use music. You have the power to use your eyes. You're in control of you. And that's something that society denies children also. Instead of them realizing that they can make their own choices, we're sort of dumbed down. There's no need for that. There is always a choice, and you are always responsible for your choices. So if you make a choice with dignity, which is of course an intuitive tool, and we call dignity self-respect, but if you feel it in your heart, if you want to know how you're using dignity, well, you can feel it. If it doesn't feel dignified, don't do it. Then you actually start to connect with character. And your character is what's going to power you to be a successful businessman. It's going to power you to fall in love with a woman who will bring out the best in you, instead of someone who just flatters you, or who's just, sexually ravenous. You can use your character to protect yourself and to communicate, because character, which is just intuitive boundaries, and intuitive boundaries are strictly for the purpose of getting where you want to go. Tenacity is what I'm talking about, and that's another old-fashioned word, and that's being committed to yourself. So how do you get rid of the voices in your head? Well, it's not easy, but if you can try using all of your senses, you may discover that eating, when you really taste what you eat, if you really chew your food, you taste it much better. And when you really chew your food, it starts to digest in your mouth. So you're not only burning calories by chewing your food, you're starting the digestion process. I can't speak. And when you do that, you actually get more nutrition from your food, and it distracts you from the brain. We have one reason we have so much chatter in our heads is that we're taught to just respond to what we're taught, which is all in the brain. So you seem like a very driven person. You seem like you're very creative. I would think that with your drive and your goals I read about on your site, you can focus on those. Focus on what really touches your heart, even if you just write it down. And it will completely enable you to, you won't think about it, but what will happen is you'll realize afterwards that you weren't hearing the chatter. There's this really good exercise that I do with people sometimes, which is, if you want to know yourself well, It's you take a piece of paper and with your dominant hand, like if you're right-handed, you write your body a letter. And then with your non-dominant hand, you write a letter from your body to yourself.
That's interesting.
And the reason why it's an amazingly powerful experience, and the reason why because you will be really surprised by what your body says back to you. I worked with people for a few years to make sure my intuitive eating program worked, and the responses from the left hand were amazing. And I did it myself, and I was very surprised. But the reason why it works is when we write with our dominant hand, it's automatic. And when we're in automatic, we're not paying attention with our senses. But the effort it takes to write with, if you're right-handed with your left hand, makes you focus. And you're so busy focusing on forming the letters. This is one of those times where the little voice is, not the negative chatter is not there. And you don't have time to think. So you actually hear what comes out is actually what you really need to hear from yourself.
Right. And what would the purpose of the letter be? Like, what would so you write letter to your body? What's
Well, the
yeah.
purpose of it is when I did it with people, the purpose of it is to know yourself better.
I'm talking specifically of the letter. So, what
Yeah,
should it contain?
it's complete. See, now this is you being in your head. This is what you know what it should contain. You just write what you feel, write to your body, connect with your body. Intuitive thinking is holistic thinking. Intuitive eating is holistic nurturing. So when you write a letter to yourself, to your body, you write a letter to your body. Only you know what to write. You write what you feel. You may feel, gosh, why aren't why do I have this extra roll of fat around the middle and I keep trying to lose it? Or you may feel, I'm so thankful that my body can perform. Or you may, who knows? You may write, you may write when you start doing it, because you're not going to think about it first, you're going to write intuitively.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
And so there's no rules in your head about what to write in the letter to your body. It's just know that you are writing to your body. That's all you need to know.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I'm thinking there are many angles one can take with this. But yeah, I can see your point. Just go with what's
Go
the
with the
most
flow.
relevant. Yeah, what's the makes
Right.
the most sense in
And
the moment.
that's exactly, and that's what intuitive thinking is. It's being the most relevant and what makes the most sense in the moment. And especially you, Philip, because you really have great ideas and you have great energy and drive. You really should trust your spirit. You should trust your gut. You should, go be in the moment. Under two things that happen that are just mind blowing with intuitive thinking is when you really do this, time expands. You find that even though you're doing what you hadn't planned, but it's what you felt you should do, that you actually have more time than you realized. And because that's the way the universe works. We are really just like there's stars in the sky, but the sky is not the stars. We're part of a bigger plan. We're all part of the universe too. And each of us has our own glow, and you have to trust yours.
Right. Well, it's definitely something that I've been focusing on. It's something that's been
Right.
gaining an increasing part in my life. My approach is that there
Mhm.
has to be a balance. And
That's
I
absolutely right.
saw this in your book as well.
Hmm.
So you talk about intuition, but you also have a lot of nutritional information there. So it's a combination of having some kind of systems and plans, but also having flexibility and being present in the moment. That has worked the best for me so far.
Right, because balance well, we're always moving like through life. We're like water, right? Life is always changing every day, every minute. So balance is something we have to constantly refocus. And in terms of intuitive eating, yep, it's all about balance. Like if you have big dinner plans, you might eat less for lunch because you know that you're going to be eating a lot at dinner. Or if you're feeling like you had a lot of carbs one day and you might want to have more proteins the next day just to balance it out. Our bodies are an amazing system of balance. You know, we breathe, we have our blood feeds our organs. Everything about us is balanced. And even our vision is balanced. That's why 20/20 vision is the best, right?
Right.
But balance is a natural result of intuitive thinking and intuitive eating. And when you go with the flow, as you mentioned before, it's because that's where the balance is. Energy, everything we sense is energy, like hearing takes energy, seeing takes energy. So we're always responding to energy. We hear through sound waves, we see through light waves. It's all about energy, and all energy balances with each other.
A lot of people get into dieting for weight loss, and
Right.
that is the main focus. So how can intuitive eating help them? And also, what kind of edge does intuitive, or what kind of benefit does intuitive eating offer over either these diets that are going on with the specific
Uh-huh.
name diets, or B, something a little bit more flexible like calorie counting and working around that?
Okay, those are good questions. First of all, diets are all about depriving yourself. And um, when you're in a psychological mode where you're depriving yourself, your natural reaction is going to balance that out, and it's gonna break. Um, and in terms of counting calories, your needs are different than you know what you need. The thing to do is to use common sense, which is what intuitive eating is. um, if you're eating, one of the best ways to control your weight is by eating less, and as opposed to focusing on how many calories are in something. Calorie counts change all the time officially, just like things that are supposedly good for us to eat, like butter or margarine. One year one is better for you, one year the other one is better for you. In terms of losing weight, intuitive eating becomes a way of life, and so it endures. People who diet almost always gain, like 90% of people who diet gain back more weight than they lost, primarily because they're not tuned in to their body. I read a bunch of diet books before I wrote the intuitive eating book, and not one of them said how you know when you're hungry or what is hunger. And not one of them said how you know when you're satisfied. In order to lose weight and keep it off, you have to have the answers to those questions. One thing that intuitive eating teaches you is that you're hungry for different things. You're hungry for food, of course, but often people think they're hungry for food, but they really want some kind of emotional satisfaction or social satisfaction, or even spiritual satisfaction. So when you use your senses and you connect with your body, that's why the book's called Am I Really Hungry? You ask yourself, if I'm really hungry, and what am I really hungry for? And when when I did the research for the book, I went out to lunch with dieters and I went out to lunch with intuitive eaters. And inevitably, the dieters would look at the menu and say, oh, this is on my diet, this isn't, this has too many calories, this doesn't. And I would say to them, well, how do you feel? And they wouldn't even connect with their own bodies. When you're cut off from the neck down, there's no way of having an enduring change from the neck down. It's illogical and it doesn't work. But if when I went out with intuitive eaters, they would look at the menu and they would say, I'm in the mood for some um, a hamburger, and I feel like having this. And but then, they would say, especially if they were like watching their weight, they would say, but I'm not going to have it with the roll because I want to eat the chips. Or they would balance it out, like we were saying before. It's all about balance, but it's about trusting yourself and going with the flow. When you're really intuitive, you're very honest with yourself. And when you're honest with yourself, you don't depend on a system or a book. Depending on a diet system that doesn't feel right, that doesn't make you feel good about yourself, that doesn't enable you to enjoy your eating, is never going to help you lose weight in any kind of enduring way.
Right. And how I'm thinking that when someone gets into this,
Yeah.
they will have a very hard time listening to their body and to their intuition because they have such a history of failure in the past, and they might be worried that if I do this and I
Hmm.
let go of some of the controls, I will just slide further down.
Well, that is definitely the programmed thinking of people on diets.
Right,
And if you read diet books, they are always demeaning.
right.
And I it's a very sad and tragic thing. I worked with some people who really had suffered for years with the diet industry, so to speak, and did have a terrible sense of failure. But the thing is, you have to start in little ways. Um, you have to start by giving yourself a chance to taste your food, and to realize that you have that all the negative things that you're describing are habits. And it's not hard to look at what you're eating. It really isn't. If you really honestly want, you have to actually be honest with yourself and say, well, do I want to change my eating habits? If your habits are things that make you feel terrible about yourself, like you can't trust yourself, these are habits that create terrible stress in your body. And one of the ironies is that when you create all that stress in your body, because it's just physical, thinks that you're in danger. And when that happens, it creates a hormone that makes your body store fat, because it's a fight or flight hormone. So it thinks you're going to have to flee to get away from the danger. And that's one reason people have so much trouble losing weight. But what I really recommend is my book and my blog and my website, because intuitive eating is a state of mind, really. It's not a diet, it's a lifestyle. It's thinking with your senses to stay clear about eating choices. It's learning to recognize your own intuitive values that keep you in sync with your body. And also it's where you discover that you can enjoy eating and being your healthy weight. If One thing I suggested to people who were emotional eaters, a lot of people became involved in helping others. When a lot of people eat out of loneliness. If you realize that you're eating out of loneliness, there's so many people in need, from children to the elderly, who need company. There's lots of ways to nurture yourself, and by helping others, you actually will lose weight.
Hmm. That's a very unorthodox but very interesting idea. I like it.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, I like being outside the box. The
Yeah,
box is suffocating.
yeah. I mean, that's, I think we're both
Yeah,
in the same outside of the box on this one.
right,
Yeah. So what is the role of, so I'm sure that this process and going from this fearful state
right.
to the intuitive state is challenging and is difficult and it takes some leaps.
You have to, first of all, you have to decide you want to do it. The second thing is that you have to be patient with yourself
Right.
and kind to yourself. And you have to start slowly. You have to, you have to decide you're going to taste what you eat. It sounds really basic, but if you chew and taste what you eat, you will eat less automatically. It's a given for two reasons. One reason is it takes 15 minutes for your messages from your stomach to get to your brain, that there's any food in it. So if you just wolf down your food, you're hungry afterwards because your body and your brain haven't connected, so you don't know in your head that you're satisfied. The other thing is when you eat and when you really taste what you eat less, because part of satisfaction, as I said, the digestive process starts in the mouth, and part of satisfaction comes from the flavor and the aroma of what you're eating. Intuition takes whatever we're experiencing and it kicks it up a notch. So if you're experiencing eating and you first of all, if I looked at a plate of food and it was unappetizing, I wouldn't eat it, because it would turn me off. If you look at a plate of food and you see it's gigantic,
Hmm.
and you say, well, you know what? I'm going to cut that in half and put half in another room out of sight, give it away, whatever. Um, and then I'm going to taste every mouthful. You will be surprised at the fact that you really don't need to eat nearly as much as your brain thinks you need to eat or as a diet tells you you need to eat. That's another problem with the calorie thing. People eat to the calories, but the point is that your stress level is different every day. Your physical activity is different every day. Everything about you is different every day. So why would you eat the same calories every day? And I have this friend who had a really hard time with dieting. I mean, he tried everything and it was impossible. And what he did is he allowed himself to eat whatever he wanted, mindlessly for 3 days a week or 4 days a week. And then the other 3 or 4 days, he completely tuned in to what he was eating and how much. And that way he wasn't depriving himself. And he discovered that his love of junk food, after this was like after a year, was so diminished he couldn't believe it, and
Hmm.
his habits were changing because he was giving himself the time to become and trusting himself to eventually find the balance that is intuitive eating.
Yeah, and I shared that experience. I found that
Hmm.
there's so much emotion that, like, the appeal of junk food is so emotionally based and so
Right. Hmm.
disconnected from the actual taste of the thing. And I lately I taste some junk food. I kind of crave it. I want it. I go for
Uh-huh.
it. I take the first bite, and it's terrible. It's just fake. It brings no satisfaction.
Right. So, but the thing to do is the reason why we like junk food is because we associate it with good times.
Yes.
So the point is that's what you're really hungry for. It's a social experience. And this is the holistic effect of intuitive eating and intuitive living. So what you will ultimately do, and you're even doing it through this work, is you're expanding your social horizons and you're nurturing the part of you that is hungry. And I think that's interesting that you had that experience about with junk food, just like my friend.
Yeah, I honestly I think if people pay attention to it,
Hmm.
it's just, yeah, it's not a very not a very natural or enjoyable taste or texture or anything going on there.
No, it's really not. And the thing about trusting your senses is that your senses, your intuition is like your natural inner drive that keeps your priorities straight. So what you're doing by really tasting that and then putting two and two together, that's intuitive thinking and intuitive eating.
Right. So let
And
me
is it
go on, sir.
so my question to you, because you keep mentioning how hard it must be, is that hard for you?
I will say that it is not easy. I
Hmm.
don't know how, like, what your experience is or the people you talk to.
Hmm.
I think any radical change is difficult, and
I agree. Any change, all change is radical.
yeah.
You, this is part of being honest with yourself. Everything is a challenge.
Yes.
Like, but that's what life is. Life is about struggle, for lack of a better words. If you think, and this is all life, like if you think of a seed in the ground, it's in the dirt, surrounded by bugs, and then the rain comes and wakes it up, and it has to fight its way through soil and stones and bacteria and all kinds of stuff to get to the earth. And then a dog could walk on it and kill it, or it can keep trying to grow. And we're just seeds. So every day we're growing towards our destination, whatever it is, and it's always a challenge. And the point is that when you realize it's always a challenge, you can embrace it. And the way to embrace it is by using determination, by using courage, by using tenacity. And the more you do it, it's like the college of life. Growing up is the college of life. Yeah, it's hard. It's been really hard for you to get to this point with the junk food, but ultimately, and this could not happen for 3 years or 10 years, or it could happen in 3 weeks or 3 months. You won't even think about it. You just won't be attracted to it. Or if you have junk food, it'll be because you want to have it with your friends, but you probably won't eat as much. You won't eat it mindlessly because you'll realize what you're doing. You tune into yourself.
Yes, it won't be an experience of dissociation that it can often be in the beginning. And the
Yeah.
reason why I emphasize the difficulty is and just how hard it is. I'm not
Hmm.
I I embrace that. I embrace that, but I think
You have
it's
no choice.
yes, you have no choice, but also like
Right.
you can I think there are degrees of how much you can change and how much you can focus on your growth. And the more you do it, the harder it is, and the more deeper you go, the harder it can be.
Right.
The reason why I talk about it is that there are a lot of public figures out there who they do their own work, but
Right.
then they present it like it was a breeze, like it was
Ah,
I just overnight success,
right.
etc., etc. And
I hear you.
I want people to understand that that is not true, and that's a
It's
lie.
never true. It's always, that's never ever true. And I think any public figure who's really a good person would admit that everybody has to climb up a mountain, and then when you're at the top of the mountain, then there's only one way, which is down. So you're always climbing.
Right.
And the thing about your senses is the simplicity of them. And sensory eating, intuitive eating is trusting the simplicity of what you sense. It's direct and it's honest. And then it's also depending on what you know from experience, which is, when I eat this, I feel bad, or this is definitely way more than a person should eat. They say you shouldn't eat anything bigger than your fist.
Hmm.
you know and then it's also tuning into what you feel, and I don't mean emotionally, I mean in your heart. um when the emotional the emotional seesaw is something that we're conditioned to ride,
Yeah.
and the intuitive balance is what we're programmed physically to have. So by trusting ourselves and believing in doing what feels right and what is right, And by understanding, the only way we're going to know that is by noticing what's actually real in our environments. um, the balance comes, but it's not easy. And life is like being in the ocean. You're always getting knocked down by a wave.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think we gave a lot of food for thought for the listeners on this one, and they're definitely. I hope that I know I will, and I hope that they experiment with this approach.
Hmm.
Let's talk about the social context.
Okay.
My experience is that any change is the second biggest obstacle after the hardship and difficulty that's inner is often your social circle. So how does it work? What is your experience and the people you talk to? What is their experience with becoming more intuitive around eating and more intuitive in general? How does that play out with their friends, family, etc.?
Well, it's very interesting how it plays out. Two things happen. One thing is that there's two different kinds of reactions. There, people who are unsure of themselves will be disparaging of you because that's how they express their own fears. My experience is that everybody really has their own path. So when you become an intuitive eater, for example, it's really very personal because eating is personal. And the only way, if somebody is pushing you to have a third piece of cake at a party or something like that, you can, and they don't understand why you're not, you can just say that I'm trusting my intuition. And nobody will argue with you about that. It's like something, the intuition's like the elephant in the room. Everybody knows it exists. People just don't all know how to depend on it. And when you really believe that and you trust it by knowing that it feels ill-dignified to have a third piece of cake, you don't have any problem with that. And in social situations, it's unbelievably interesting. What happens with intuition is when you start respecting yourself by connecting with foresight of self-defense, like thinking about the impact of what you're going to do before you do it, or connecting with dignity, or connecting with courage, then you will start attracting a different kind of person.
Oh yeah.
Yes, because we attract who we are. So if you have a habit of putting yourself down, or just going with people because it's the way, then you will, and even though it doesn't feel right, then you're going to attract one kind of person. But if you're in a social situation and you're not comfortable intuitively, which means you've looked at what's going on, you've thought about how you feel about it, how it makes you feel about yourself, and it doesn't feel very honorable, so you're not going to do it. If people are going to do it around you anyway and you're not comfortable, you should leave. But you will discover that you are actually never alone, and you will start attracting people with similar values, because intuitive thinking is global values that have guidelines but no limits. Like curiosity, there's no limits to curiosity, but we all know what it is. So if you're in an environment with a lot of closed-minded people who are never curious about another point of view, they're not for you. And you will find by closing one door, a window opens.
Yeah. That that has been my experience for sure.
Hmm.
Did you did you have to let go of some people in this process who would
I totally did. I actually left a marriage in this process.
right.
So it was the healthiest thing I ever did. My whole life completely changed as a result of me fine-tuning my senses. And I discovered, first of all, I discovered what I really loved to do, which I wasn't doing because I was trying to please someone else. And I also discovered that I met people who also loved what I loved, and I have met interesting people. But It's pain is part of pleasure. It's part of the balance. And in terms of relationships, the most important thing is mutual respect. And real mutual respect is intuitive thinking. You have to respect yourself before you can respect someone else.
Yes.
So if you don't respect your own decisions and your own body, you will find yourself in social situations with people who don't respect you.
Yeah, it's so funny. I'm just as I listen to your answer,
Uh-huh.
I before this interview, it's not out yet at the moment of our
Uh,
speaking, but before this interview, I have
right.
this mini series coming out on relationships
Ah.
and what I see as principles of relationships, and
Hmm.
you're hitting a lot of those a lot of those buttons. Yeah, I think and I have this experience. You attract people who have similar values. You have to have people who are respectful. That's all
Well,
all true.
that's right. But the way it works intuitively is you if you for relationships, intuitive boundaries keep relationships connected and open, because any relationship is part of the stream of change. So if you are talking to someone in a relationship, you maintain your dignity and your self-respect. And if you're really dignified and have self-respect, you don't abuse somebody else.
Yes.
And um, also, like, if you have shared goals, then you look at the bigger picture. Intuitive thinking. Now, I'm not talking about. I mean, with intuitive eating, of course, you look at the long-term picture, that you'll be healthier and that your weight will be healthier and that your eating habits will be good and that you'll learn a lot about yourself. But in terms of a social relationship, um, it's it's real, especially like a romantic relationship, for example. It's so important to be aware of the big picture, and intuitive thinking, because it's holistic, constantly reminds you of not only who you are, but who you are in the relationship, and who you are in terms of your work, and who you are in terms of the world. And all of us are very important, and all of our opinions are important, and all of our feelings are important. But as we said earlier, when we are clear about our boundaries, we have balance. And for relationships, some of the boundaries they're all listed under character, of course, but um, when you prudence is your options. If you have an option, you always have an option. So if you're in a struggling environment in a relationship, what kind of relationships are you writing about?
All. I think the same principles
Like in
apply
the family, like in
universally. Family,
right, right.
friendships, romantic
Mhm.
relationships. I think the same ideas are valid.
I think I think they do too, and I think it's really important to include the fact that some relationships just don't work, and that every person has limits. And when you love a person, you understand that they have limits. I mean, in a family, there's nothing you can do about it, in meaning that you're stuck with that person for life because they're your family. But if you have, say, an uncle or a brother who is emotionally abusive, like every time they see you, they call you their favorite name, which is demeaning, or something like that, you can just avoid that person as much as possible, because some people are so locked up in their own heads, like this kind of individual, that they don't even know how they're impacting you. It's really not personal. It's just their personalities, and they're never going to change. The only person we can change is ourselves. And you can say, if you're in that kind of situation, I really wish you wouldn't call me that because it makes me feel badly about myself. But you have to be prepared for them to poo-poo it, or they may be totally surprised and never call you that again. You have to have courage. You have to have courage to trust what you feel in your heart. If you're in a relationship and something's making you uncomfortable, the best thing you can do is talk about it in a way that is honest, but not emotional, and not manipulative.
Right. Well, Jane, thank you for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure.
We will have a link to your book in the description, but if you could tell my listeners where they can find more of your work.
That would be great. There's two places. There's a website called sensualthinking.com, which has lots of answers. And I also have a very popular blog. It gets about 60,000 page views a month currently, called intuitivescribe.blogspot.com.
Right. We will link to that as well.
Right. And also for the book, there's a Am I Really Hungry net website, because it's going to be changed, but you can still go to that, and we're just going to point it to the new site that's being built that's got a lot of answers about intuitive eating. And I have an intuitive eating blog, which actually does pretty well. But it's got a very long. I think there's one called Am I Really Hungry.blogspot.com.
Right. We'll sort all of that out.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm available if somebody has a question. I'm always available to answer. They can just send me an email to Jane Fine Tuning, all one word, JANE Fine Tuning @yahoo.com.
Thank you for listening to the Valiant Growth Podcast, and I dare you to flourish today.